Hello and welcome to the weekly commodity market update. I'm Brownfield anchor Will Robinson, joined as always by the University of Missouri's Ben Brown. Hey, Ben.
Good morning, Will.
Good morning. How's your day been going so far?
So far, so good. It's a little chilly today.
Yeah, the weather kind of threw us a little bit of a curveball here in mid-Missouri during the Easter holiday. It was a little rainy on us.
Yeah, I think I saw something where it was colder on Easter this year than it was on Christmas.
Well, that seems just about right. But talking about markets, what adjustments did we see from last week coming into this week?
Yeah, for sure. So this is if you're a supporter of high prices, or if you like high prices, this is a week for you because pretty much up across the board. When we look at old crop corn, those May contracts, which we're getting close to the end of those, 52 cents to $8.16. The new crop corn was up 31 cents now to $7.49. Old crop soybeans for May up 67 to 17.22. New crop soybeans up 37 to 15.22. That soybean oil complex or the soybean oil mix rose almost 6 cents per pound to close above 80 cents on Monday, which that's kind of a nice threshold to break. I guess we hadn't really seen vegetable oils trade above 80 cents on a consistent basis, and I think we're there. Soybean meal up $7.50 per short ton to 466.60 per short ton. In the wheat market, old crop wheat up 44 cents to 11.25, and then new crop July wheat up 38 to 11.27.
That's it's not always the funnest thing to say. Up 466.60 for a short time. The price movement, it's kind of funny sometimes. But
Yeah,
anyway, looking at the market highlights, what really got us to where we ended up?
for sure. So last week we had the March estimate, or the March total, reported by the National Oilseed Processors Association. They reported that the United States crushed 181.8 million bushels, which was a new record for the month of March, up from February and up from the previous March as well. U.S. ethanol production was down 8,000 barrels last week, falling below 1 million barrels per day. New export sales were up for corn, soybean meal, and grain sorghum, but down for whole soybeans, soybean oil, and wheat from the week prior. Corn, soybeans, soybean oil, and grain sorghum all remain well above the seasonal pace to hit USDA's annual export targets on the sales side. When we look at actual physical exports themselves through the inspections, last week they were up for soybeans, grain sorghum, and wheat, but down for corn compared to the previous week. Managed money built positions across the board for all of our Chicago commodities. And then this week's crop progress report showed only 4% of the U.S. corn crop planted compared to 7% a year ago. Winter wheat ratings continue to decline. We did see a little bit of a drop in that good to excellence combined score, and then an increase in that very poor wheat rating.
That seems to be, a very a tough issue to really get around it, and it's been ongoing for a while. That kind of leads us into our main topic today, which is weather and how those are impacting the markets. But we're seeing a lot of dryness, obviously, in key wheat states. You're looking at Kansas, Nebraska, up into South Dakota, down into Oklahoma. So really, what's been the impact there directly into the markets? How much support has that provided, and what's the outlook?
For sure. So this has been a concern for us really all winter is the dryness out west. And we were concerned that when that wheat started to green up and come out of dormancy, would it actually have the moisture to go ahead and develop? And in certain places, if you look at areas that grow a lot of soft red winter wheat, there has been the moisture. So those areas would be western Missouri, eastern Kansas, places across Indiana and Ohio into Michigan. Those places all have had the moisture to really develop that soft red winter wheat. It's the hard red winter wheat that we see in Kansas, Nebraska, and the Dakotas, like you mentioned, that continues to remain under drought. And that drought has really continued to expand. Now, we did see some snowfall in the upper plains over the weekend. If you look at Twitter, they had actually a lot of snow. I don't want to downplay the moisture that they received. So, there was some moisture in those areas, and it might actually have a counter effect of all that snow on top of the wheat right as it's coming out of dormancy. We like to see that snowpack when it's in dormancy, because then it helps protect it against really hard freezes. This time of year, we'd like to see the sun shine and help that crop develop. So I am concerned about wheat, and certainly that's a market right now that's got a lot of attention on it, given all the challenges that we see overseas. There's really not a lot of relief in sight for the U.S. wheat market. If you want to think about, can we produce more wheat? Well, yeah, we can plant more spring wheat in the upper plains, because corn and soybeans continue to compete, and some of the other oilseed crops for that matter as well. So really the only relief for the winter wheat crop, or the winter wheat market, is going to depend on South America at this point. It does look like they're going to produce a good crop, but certainly that wheat market could remain tight as drought continues.
So not only are we seeing drought, but it's drought coupled with really cold conditions. Does that have any additional impact right now? You talk about, snow coming almost at the wrong time when you want that to just be, water in the form of rain. So what's that adding into the mix?
Well, we don't want freeze warnings when the wheat's coming out of dormancy. And that's certainly what we saw this morning here in Columbia. We were below 32 degrees when I woke up this morning. That's something that, especially for those early season soybeans, if any of them were sprouted for early season planting soybeans, this morning would have been something that would have caused some panic, I think, a little bit. So the same thing applies to wheat when it's coming out of dormancy and growing. These cold temperatures aren't good for it.
Shifting over, moving a little bit eastward, it's been almost a night and day difference with all the moisture that we've seen, especially to the east of the Mississippi River, but in Missouri as well, where we are. So what's the storyline there? We're having a tough time really getting into the field right now to get some of that early planting done. So how's that impacting the market?
Yeah, so one of the questions I think a lot of traders were having earlier this spring was, if we had a dry planting season, how much more corn would we plant? And especially after we got the planting intentions report that showed less than 90 million acres of corn, many analysts had anticipated that number would grow, especially given the dry conditions we had seen, signaling that the planting window would be adequate to get in the field and roll. I think to your question specifically, it is becoming obvious that we're not going to have a very early planting season. It's also probably not likely we're going to have an early planting season. I think that now the question becomes, do we have a normal planting season? And for the Eastern Corn Belt, I think there is great concern. It's wet. It's been raining every couple of days, to where, the planters really just haven't rolled, and there's been very low progress this spring so far. I'm no climatologist, but my climatology friends tell me that, this is setting up to be exactly like what we should expect going forward, that the spring and fall are going to become wetter in the Eastern Corn Belt and drier in the Western Corn Belt. And so, when we talk about this is abnormal, my climatology friends are saying, no, this is exactly what we'd expect. More rain during the spring planting season out east, drier conditions out west. So if this continues and develops, certainly we start worrying about not only the drought conditions impacting wheat, but we start worrying about taking prevent plant corn as well.
And just taking that a step further, talking about some climatologists that we've talked to here recently, as we move more into May, we're going to stop seeing some of those widespread rains. It's going to be more of those spotty thunderstorm type patterns, and that's where a lot of the moisture is going to come from. So it's going to be a little bit more of showers that are dotted across states and across areas. So maybe we can get some more planters rolling at that point. So if planters though are kept out of the field, at what point does that start to add more momentum into the market upward for things like corn and soybeans?
Good question. So there have been some pockets of the country already in that spotty rainfall scenario that you were describing. I was surprised when I went home, which my family farms in Western Missouri. And when I went home for Easter this weekend on Friday, I was surprised how many planters were actually rolling in Western Missouri. The closer I got to home, it seemed like every field had at least a tractor or a fertilizer spreader in every field for a period of time. So there have been some pockets. To answer your question specifically, Will, I don't think the markets get overly excited about late planting until we get to May. I think that's the philosophical, mind shift, if you will, in terms of when do we start hitting panic, and it really starts to become an issue, I think, trying to get the corn in, because it becomes a question of how late can we plant corn without hurting yield.
Mhm.
And certainly, I think that starts somewhere around that first week of May.
And maybe that question becomes more important in a year like this, looking at the what projected global ending stocks could look like around harvest time. So that's something that could be under a microscope. Another thing that I'd like to ask you about is the global demand picture. Where does that sit right now? We've seen some very large sales of corn as of late to China, a few smaller soybean sales here and there, but really, what's the outlook for demand?
Yeah, that's a great question, Will. And certainly, I think from a global corn picture, sticking with corn for just a second, everybody's kind of in the market for corn, especially as we look to South America. Their safrinha crop, which again is that larger crop, represents about 75% of their total production. It looks good. It looks fine for now, but certainly some of it is already starting to see some drought stress, and the forecast is turning dry. There is a very defined dry season in South America. Normally that starts around May, and it seems like that might have started 4 weeks earlier this year. So we look at the forecast down there, the next 3 months, the rest of April, May, and June, all look for below normal rainfall for South America. The reason I bring that up is I think when we look at international buyers around the globe, they're looking at that outlook for South America corn and saying, hey, if we don't have corn coming from South America, we need to get in and really lock in some insurance and make some purchases for, let's just say, later in the calendar year. So all the way in like that November, December timeframe, which for the US is when we're normally exporting soybeans, right? Like that's our dominant soybean export window. Does corn come in and compete with that to some extent? It probably will a little bit, but we're not going to. I mean, we're going to continue to really export soybeans during that window. So I do think, there is some concern globally for corn, and it's one of those things that here in the United States, if we had, trouble planting our crop, like what we were just talking about, it's only going to exacerbate these prices even further. Our highest national average corn price, cash corn price, is in the mid $8, and right now we're hovering right around that $8 mark for cash corn as a national average. So certainly the all-time highs are within reach, and have a probability of hitting as we move this way through the summer.
All right, so some good things for growers to think about it as it comes to when they market their grain, potentially, and just watching developments going ahead. So reports to watch on Wednesday, we have the ethanol report that comes out on Thursday, export sales, and then Friday for you livestock guys out there, cattle on feed, and that could adjust some of the commodity markets going forward. So as always, it's a pleasure, Ben. I'm Will Robinson on Brownfield.